Wait, whatever.
Once you got that. What's the next thing? What's the next one?
All right, so you guys ready?
Yeah, that's good.
All right, so I'm here today. I'm a little bit of an outlier on what I'm doing, but I'm basically turning the boreal forest into my food forest recreational area. I'm going to show you some of the processes that I'm using behind it. And I'm going to start by telling you what my mother had. Growing up, she had a beautiful garden. She had a greenhouse and she had terraced rows on a hillside with stone steps and plants. What you'd think it was a traditional garden, trellises. With this type of garden, it's highly structured. There's a lot of maintenance, but it's also highly productive. Sustainability is very low on it because she's mostly planting annuals that every year you have to restart and replant. It takes a lot of human intervention. The long-term resilience is very low. Again, the type of plants are mostly annuals. Most of the foods we eat are annuals. And in order to grow an annual, you have to clear off the soil, till the soil. You're trying to disturb the soil. And the reason why we eat a lot of these and have been cultivating them is because when humans were nomadic, we've moved to different parts of the world and we would tear up the earth and rake the leaves back and we'd build a little structure and we'd live there until we used up the food and we'd move on. I married a Filipino woman and I've got to spend quite a bit of time in the Philippines, and the way they do things is quite a bit different. They have the traditional gardens, but they also have a lot of perennials that they grow and they use a lot of native plants. It's not uncommon to eat different fruits, and as you're walking down a trail, pick a fruit off a tree, eat it, spit the seeds on the ground, and if something grows there, that's great. Maybe you dig it up and move it closer to your house, or maybe you just leave it there and it's a community tree. When she was 16, her family moved to America and they abandoned their property. They had about 30 acres there where they were growing all kinds of citrus trees, avocado trees, cashews. They had fish ponds. And when we went back there, 10 years later, the jungle had consumed most of the property, but a lot of these plants still live without any human intervention. The fruit trees needed to be pruned back and taken care of, but they were still there without anybody helping out. And that really got me thinking about things quite a bit differently than all the work that my mother would put in every year. And if she didn't put that work in, nothing was going to grow. And so the next structure that we're going to, well, let me just go back and say that it's semi-structured, the maintenance is medium, the productivity is lower than my mother's, but there's a lot less input. It's also more sustainable and there's more biodiversity. When they grow plants and the weeds pop up, they just dig them up and use it as chop and drop. You weed around the plant, you put the plants down around the others. So if we get into the forest is totally, there's no structure. The forest creates itself through iterations. There's different successions that happen and different disturbances that happen. And that's what actually changes the structure of the forest. Productivity is low, especially in the boreal forest. The main thing we grow here is squirrels. The sustainability is very high, adaptability is very high, it doesn't take much human intervention. So this is where I live and work. We own the Asian food market. And you can see we're stacking functions here. We have a grocery store, we have rentals, and we live here. But we also use this area to grow plants and do experiments.
Where is that?
Yeah, this is here in Fairbanks. It's off of Aurora. I don't know what slide was there, so we'll skip it. Oh, I do know that was actually an important slide, but I'll explain it. So this is an overhead view of our property. There's a big building here. It's on the south side of the property. That's a problem. And the reason it's a problem is because up here is our parking lot and it's shaded. And even late in the spring, we still have ice in front of our driveways, while the whole rest of the lot is clear. Also over here, as you can see, I don't know what happened there.
Sorry, I'm just trying to see.
That's right. So over here, there's also a line of cottonwood trees. And that's a problem for us because they drip stickies all over us and they drop cotton. And so I don't like that. And then another problem is you can see it's a big wind tunnel. This is just a long straight area. There's a couple 100-foot long building here. And so we get really bad wind. And then Carlisle also is right across the street from us. We're in an industrial area. And so the trucks, as they come in, they drop silt everywhere and the wind blows it everywhere into our parking lot.
I'm gonna try and mirror something else and download it from online.
Okay,
and
that
see it.
PDF too might be the way to
Yeah,
go. And so anyways, there's numerous problems that I'm talking about. Another problem when we first bought the building is when I plow all the snow, I'd push it to the end of our driveway and then it would melt and the grade was wrong. So snow would actually, the runoff would go into our building's foundation. So I wanted to start thinking about solutions to all these problems. How can I engineer the landscape to perform functions that it's not performing now? And so my first solution is where I put my snow pile, I'm gonna dig a depression. And that way, when the snow melts, there's an area for the water to go. It's away from my foundation. And all these trees that are here that I don't want, what I did with them is I cut them and I laid them down. And then I used the dirt that I dug and covered it. I created what the Germans would call a hugelkultur mound. And it's a really efficient structure because you're not wasting all of that carbon. That carbon there will store water for you and supply lots of nutrients to the plants.
it's downloading.
Is it working?
I think it'll work.
Okay,
I'll just.
so
pivot.
now that I have this pool of water here on the edge of my parking lot, what I did is I dug a channel where it runs along the edge of my parking lot and goes down into the street. And I didn't quite like that because I don't want a bunch of, I don't want a bunch of silt and topsoil and trash going out into the roads. So what I also did is I dug a settling pond.
I can extend. Is this what you're trying to show?
Yeah, can we just extend that out?
Yeah, and then.
Sorry,
there's-
it's a lot easier to explain if I have pictures.
Okay, so this is.
Yeah, let's just start right there. Right there.
Okay.
That's perfect. Thank you. Okay, so as you can see here, this is where those trees were. Here's where this new hugelkultur mound is, and here's this puddle that was once snow. You can see the shade from the building. You can see it, it's not melted here, but over here, everything's thawed. And so by putting the building on the north side of the dock, we could have entryways and a parking lot that's not ice mostly. This is the overflow that you can see running down the edge of the parking lot. We go to the next frame. Okay, and here's the parking lot. There's where the snow goes. The water's running down and it's filling this settling pond. This pond will dry up in a couple days. It's not there long enough for mosquitoes to form or anything like that, but it's quite beautiful to me. So we go to the next frame. There's another picture of the water going into it. You can go to the next one. And so all that soil that I excavated, now on the opposite side of the entryway, I used it to pile up and build this berm here, and I built these. I had a bunch of soil, I wasn't sure of exactly what kind of structures I wanted to build, but I knew that I wanted to try to create some microclimates. And that's why I have this. This is on the west side of the building, so it's mostly sheltered. You can see this fence here, this is on the south, and there's also this roof slope here. What happens is this water runs off the roof and it falls into here. And once the ground becomes saturated, it slowly runs down. All the runoff snow and everything too, it ponds up in here and it gives the water a chance to soak into the ground. Because otherwise in the spring melt off, the ground's still frozen. And all that beautiful snow and water we have mostly just runs down into the rivers and the lakes. What I'm trying to do is capture that and hold it as long as I can. This ground is very, very poor. It's just silty dirt. The neighbor's lawn, it actually looks pretty good there, but they run a lot tighter ship than I do, and they're constantly mowing the grass. And as they mow it, they pull it off, they bag it and throw it in the trash. And so this area has stayed silty gravel forever. Well, what I'm doing is I'm building soil. And the way that I do that is by collecting wildflower seeds. Everywhere I go, I'm always looking at plants and collecting seeds and buying seeds and trading seeds. You go to the next one, you can see how bad the soil is that this is growing on. And so I spread them. And you can see these pioneer species, these annuals, their function is to grow up fast and die and fall away. If you wanted to maintain a wildflower meadow like this, what you'd have to do is mow it and rake it off. Otherwise, what happens is you start accumulating carbon and nutrients in the soil. Here's some more pictures. It's really beautiful. Every week or two, there's different flowers that come up. You go to the next. Same here. Want to go to the next? So this is a little bit later on. This is a few years down the road. You can see that the wildflowers have changed. We're starting to get into some woodier. I'm using sunflower seeds here because they put on a lot of biomass. And I'm trying to turn that silt into something that will hold moisture. I'm also collecting wood and throwing it down into these. And as that breaks down, it's going to enrich this dirt into something, that you can grow perennials perennials in other plants. Also, again, here's this roof slope. Here's this area. You go to the next slide. You can see I'm actually able to grow ferns here. And what was just silt a few years ago, dry silt. And there's also other things. I collect plants everywhere I go. I have plants from Valdez, like devil's clubs and things like that, growing in this area now. You go to the next one. So this is that hugelkultur mound. I'm also doing the same thing. It's just poor, silty soil, and I'm spreading wildflower seeds, and I'm letting them go, and I'm letting them die back. You go to the next. So here's the sunflowers a little bit later on. You want to go to the next frame. You can see that I'm also starting to put perennials into it and grow. Go to the next frame. Like rhubarb. Rhubarb's a great plant up here. It takes zero maintenance, comes back every year, puts off a lot of material. Here's that pond that I dug. You can see I dug the pond after I had already started growing wildflowers and making the soil better. But I reseeded it again because I removed all the topsoil. I go to the next frame. So this is me now. You can see a lot of grasses have come through. I'm also getting some more perennials, like these big flowers. This was really early in the spring and the grass just shot up from all the melt off. All this was saturated. There was plenty of water. And so a lot of people think, oh, you should mow it back and take care of it and this and that. But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to enrich that soil. So instead, I just go through and I pull up the grass. Go to the next frame. The peony growers are going to cringe, but I use it to feed my perennials. So if you go to the next. I also use my salmon carcasses. A lot of people have bad problems with it. I know I had animals get into it, things like that. Or I got too ambitious and I'm trying to deal with a 55-gallon trash can that's completely full and weighs 600 pounds. So what I do now is I take a 5-gallon bucket. As I'm cleaning my salmon, I fill it with the carcasses. Once it's almost full, I'll fill it up with water, put a lid on it, and then I put it somewhere not next to me, far away. I just let it sit for a couple of years. And then if you take a big paint stirrer on an electric drill, you can just blend it up in the bucket and it turns into an amazing fish mulch. You go to the next frame. And I use that to feed my perennials. You can see these roses. These are seeds that I've collected from around town. The library has beautiful roses. They're fun to germinate and grow. Go to the next frame. Again, this was the picture of the property. So I wanted to show what was happening, but the south side here, you can see all these trees and the building right next to it. It's a dark corridor. And also the runoff from the roof, it gets a lot of water. So it's a little microclimate in the back of my backyard. I use it. I tried growing, I don't know, probably 100 different grapes from seed. I had about 5 of them winter. This grape is probably 6 years old, and that's as big as it gets. You could say it's a failure, but I see it as a success in that I found grapes that will live through our winters. But it's planted in the wrong location. It's in the dark back behind where it shouldn't be. So if you go to the next frame. So I've been experimenting with different plants. Gooseberries are a plant that I think we should be focusing on up here. It carries a disease that attacks certain type of tree. Drawing a blank, sorry. We don't have it up here. But anyways, in Europe, they're really popular. If you go to the next frame, maybe. So every year what I do is I've been collecting all kinds of wide variety of species of plants and local plants, and I try to grow them out and I torture test them. I basically, I'll get into it a little bit later, but just know for now what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to build a repository of genetics that will survive in the Arctic. In the future, me or other people can use this to create species. For the next. And the next. So, oh, if you want to go back up there, sorry. So this is my, we're gonna skip ahead now to a piece of property that I purchased. It's 20 acres in Salcha. And as you can see here, again, the property, there's a road here on the south side. The property's on the north side of the road. It slightly slopes to the north. And it's an interesting piece of property because it's mostly aspen and willow. There's some drainages that run through the property. This one off to the corner is perennial, but there's one down through the center that runs seasonally, mostly at breakup time. And again, I did the calculation and there's millions of gallons of water that run down through my property and almost none of it saturates into the ground because the ground's frozen during runoff. The rest of the summer, we get about 13 inches of rain if we're lucky, and most of that's in the fall. So we're dealing with the whole springtime into summer with virtually no water. So what I'm doing here, if you go to the next frame, you can see this is the perennial water, which I'm very happy about, even though I only have a little piece of it in the corner of my property. You go to the next frame. And the next frame. Oh my goodness.
Well, I can try that download now.
Is it not, it's not showing them?
This open now. So let's
Oh, not
try this.
open? Okay. Skip down a ways.
Right.
Just go right up here. Right there's fine, start there.
This one.
So this is my piece of property again. It's hard to tell, but there's,
Is that too zoomed in?
no, yeah, go to zoom back out.
Mhm.
Well, that was fine if you want to go, sorry.
I
That's
do.
perfect.
Okay.
So here's the perennial drainage. Right down through here is the seasonal drainage. It runs down through and it settles out into this. This is basically a big plateau or a bench. Off here, there's a steep edge, and this is the lower area of Salcha. This is basically river height down here. And I'm about 100 feet higher at peak. You'll go to the next.
I'm sorry, this is.
That's all right. I anticipated this. You go to the next frame. So this is the water. This is the perennial water in the springtime. Go to the next frame. And so that drainage, if you look at it, that little stream, that was towards the very end of breakup. But as you can see, there's quite a bit of water in through here. This is the drainage that I'm talking about. The willows that have grown on both sides of it and fallen into it. We're kind of a late, we're in a mid succession, but we're towards the end of it. You go to the next frame. So as you can see here, here's some more of that. And what I've done in this depression is I've just taken sticks that I'm clearing and I've laid it out at narrow parts just to kind of slow that flow of water down a little bit more. It also catches silt that's running down and leaving my property. So behind these brush piles, you can see that there's silt depositing. Go to the next frame. Here's another picture. There's the drainage. They're just brush piles. The property is completely overgrown, so I need to do something with all this material. So this is one of the easy things to do. So this is actually a fairly deep pond. It all along the drainages are permafrost. It's starting to melt. And as it melts, there's the root structures up top are a mat, and those mats collapse in on itself. And you have all these braided out messes of trees. Go to the next frame. This is a permafrost tunnel that hasn't completely collapsed, but it's about 3 feet deep and you can see that there's ice in there. That lens is melting. Go to the next. And this is what it looks like when it's melted. This is the reality that we're gonna have to start facing in Alaska is the tundra thaws. So we need to start figuring out solutions on how we're gonna utilize this instead of being a problem. If there's a house built here, it'd be terrible. So we need to be able to identify these and use them properly. We go to the next. And this is me brush mowing. This is one of my favorite things to do. When I first got the property, it was so dense you could hardly get through it. And so what I did is I just got a brush mower and I would just mow in circles, and I would observe the land and I would follow the contours, and where I could get through, I would get through, and where I couldn't, and I needed a chainsaw, well, then I would come back if I needed. So if you want to go to the next frame. But behind me, the interesting thing is once you start opening up the canopy and clearing the forest and light can hit the floor, bluebells almost immediately reemerge. It's amazing that these plants can stay dormant like they do in the ground, because there's no way that they can grow as fast as they do just from seed in one season. If you go to the next slide, I'm always observing for plants that are unusual. When I'm mowing, I'm really mindful. If there's patches of blueberries or raspberries or anything useful, I make a point to avoid it. And what I'll do is I'll try to encourage its growth by cutting back other trees and branches to allow that light in. This is a bluebell that's pink. You'll see a lot of pink bluebells, but they turn blue. This one actually didn't turn blue. So I flagged it. And what I'll do is I'll try to encourage its area to grow. And I'll probably continue to propagate it to see if I can find any, if I can continue that pink trait. We go to the next. So this is basically what the forest looks like. It's very, very dense. Go to the next frame. You can see that there's standing dead, there's fallen dead. Basically, it's a giant fire hazard. Also, not in this picture, but there are some spruce trees. Spruce trees are very, very shade tolerant. And so what they do is they grow slowly, and eventually they'll grow up and they'll start shading out all these aspen trees and they'll die back. The aspen trees are all competing with each other. You can see that they're just growing straight up. If you go to the next frame, but that doesn't mean that moose aren't still around, even though this forest, if you go back a frame, moose in Alaska aren't like giraffes. They haven't gained the trait of an extremely long neck to be able to eat the few leaves at the very top of this. So what moose do is actually moose engineer the environment. This is largely a bunch of willow trees, and you can see that the tops of them have been broken back. Moose, a lot of times what I've observed is they save the willows to eat till late winter, early spring. When the snow is so deep, it's hard to get anything else. And what happens is if the trees become too big and dense for them to eat, they'll take it and they'll snap the top off with their head. So if you go, and there's a reason why they do that. The reason why they do that is it encourages all this new growth. There's all this vigorous growth where the moose had broke the top. This would be called pollarding, if that's what you're doing, which is an option. If you have a lot of tall, spindly willows and you want to save them, you can coppice them by cutting them all the way down at the ground when they're dormant, and they'll shoot up growth. Or you can cut off the top and it'll grow up. It's good to do both of them because it allows different heights for that vegetation to grow. As you can see here, there were 3 birds' nests also in this. That structure birds love. It's easy for them to build nests and they're very well protected. If you're lucky, you can see a lot of yellow warblers and other things coming in and using that. Go to the next. Also, on the property, there's lots of ruffed grouse. Ruffed grouse, they eat a lot of the willows and the aspen. And so by encouraging all this renewal of the forest and new growth, I can really increase the number of birds that are on my property. And that's one of my primary goals initially, is just rejuvenating the forest, taking out the standing dead, mulching, creating pathways. Animals love pathways. Moose can go right through this somehow, but they would prefer to walk on a path. Go to the next. So as you can see here, there's an old culvert on the property that I was going to throw away, but there's a male drumming. I got to listen to him drum day after day. I'm hoping he found a mate, but it was really kind of one of the highlights of watching the wildlife in my property. So there's me. I'm just cleaning up the property some more. This is one of the permafrost sinkholes. It was probably 5 feet deep in the middle that had depressed, and you can see all these trees had fallen in. So I decided I was going to try to figure out how to utilize this as something positive instead of it being a negative. Go to the next frame. So the first thing I did before I cut anything out was just observe what's growing there. These depressions are actually little microclimates, and you can see that there's Jacob's ladders growing, there's raspberries growing, there's all kinds of other things, fireweed. We go to the next frame. So again, this is just the mesa brush. You go to the next frame. So what I did is I cut it all out and I just let it drop into the bottom of this. I'm gonna let all that wood just rot. It'll also help hold moisture, because what I'm doing with those drainages is I'm gonna start directing the flow of seasonal water into these. And hopefully I can capture some of that water and have it saturate into my ground as opposed to running off and going down into the lowlands. It'll just sit as a slough or a pond. We go down again. Another thing that I'll do is I'll collect mushrooms. You know, a lot of wild mushrooms are incredibly hard to propagate indoors or artificially, but in the woods, you can find where they're naturally growing. And then what you can do is you can either add more wood to this area, or I can move them to other areas that are similar. So that's something very popular I do. Another thing you can do with mushrooms, if you find ones that are full of bugs and you don't want to eat, you can dry them and you can just hang them from trees. And once they dry, the spores will spread. It's doing the job for you. So what I did with these mushrooms, if you want to go to the next frame, is I actually broke up a lot of that. The white in the wood is the mycelium. That's the body of the mushroom. The fruit of the mushroom is what we think of as a mushroom. And so I spread all that through all this wood that it's feeding off of. And then what I'm doing is taking the soil and covering it up and also tapering this where it's easier to get in and out of. On top of that, I'll try planting different plants. On the shaded areas, try to use things like ferns and hostas and other plants. And then also on the drier sides and the loose soil, raspberries love them. And so if I find a raspberry plant that's delicious in the wild or has many, many raspberries, I'll collect seeds off of it and I'll just scatter it into it. Berries are really easy because you could just take the berries, put it in a bucket, agitate it to where the seeds have separated, and you can just water areas. I do that with my strawberries. When I'm picking strawberries and there's rotten strawberries on my plants, I just throw it in a bucket, put some water in it, and I just spread it where I want them to grow. Not all of them will grow. I'm not planting them specifically. I just let nature decide what wants to grow there. And so it's really, really easy. And that's what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to put in the least amount of effort as possible in the actual growing process. Trying to find plants that want to express themselves, but I'm trying to figure out where to plant those. I'm trying to figure out how to create the microclimates that they want, the right amount of moisture, the right amount of sunlight, the right amount of companion plants. And that's a lot of the big challenges with converting an existing forest into a food forest or anything else. The typical way you farm is you clear off the land and then you plant. Well, this is a different system because I'm trying to take an existing system and make it more complicated. I do that through things like mosaicing. Instead of having a giant piece of land that's monolithic, like black spruce or spruce, I'm going to cut out sections. I'm going to leave sections where there's old growth that is ready to catch on fire and standing dead. And I'm also going to take areas I'm going to rejuvenate. And then other areas I'll clear completely. So if you want to go to the next frame. Here you can see there's just some mushrooms also. These are morels, they're popping up. Go to the next frame. So again, these are those tall spindly trees I'm talking about. Look at them, you can see that there's really nothing for anything to eat. The moose can't eat it. The ptarmigan and grouse, sometimes they'll go up and eat the buds. And also here's the spruce trees. You can see they're starting to get large enough that they're going to be the dominant species. What's that?
Okay, how about 2 more minutes?
Oh gosh, we got a long ways to go. All right, so viewers want to keep going?
Yeah.
Okay, so those tall spindly trees, what I found about them is if they fall down horizontal and get sunlight, they'll actually put new growth on, vigorous new growth. Next frame. And so there's another example of that new growth. If you go to the next frame. So what I'm trying to do here is I'm experimenting by building these living structures. It doesn't look like anything great, but I'm laying these down and I'm laying them down loose. And the idea is I'm going to take all these young plants that are tall and spindly and I'm going to promote all kinds of new growth. That way the grouse and the moose have something to eat. We go to the next frame and you can see this is what's happening. All these new shoots. So also, and these big voids that are filled underneath, I'm interplanting other species. And what I'm doing is I'm using that as a form of protection for these plants. The moose will eat the plants that are that they're used to that are feeding height, while these lower ones have 2 to 3 feet to grow before they look like anything tasty. So next frame. And so I'm gonna have to, right here, this is the first 100 apple seeds that I grew from seed. I did it at a community garden. That's the wrong place for it. They don't like trees there. Plus apples don't really like to be moved too much. Go to the next frame. This is an apple that I planted from seed. It's almost 10 years old. It's probably 9 to 10 feet tall, and it's now flowering, producing fruit. This is a Malus floribunda. Everywhere I go, I'm always looking for plants that I can gather. Unique plants that other people put a lot of effort into and brought up here. This is a zone 4 tree, yet somebody found one that would live here. When I plant apple seeds, it normally takes me 100 apples seedlings to get 5 that'll make it for the first 2 years. And so if I can find trees that are growing in the interior already, it gives me a major boost on what the survivability rate is. I collect crab apples and other things. And what I do is I'll cold stratify them. I have different techniques of doing that, but this isn't an apple. Then what I'll do is I'll plant them out in totes. And once they start germinating, we go down, right again, then I'll plant them out into individual containers where I torture test them. They have to survive a winter in a container, and then I plant it out onto my property. Go to the next one, next one. When they're out of the property, what I do is I'll tag them with a marker that gives the species, the genus, the species, the year that they germinated. And if they can make it again, then I'll give them a unique identifier. I also use the local materials to mark where the plants are at. As you can see, there's a maple interplanted with some of the other trees. These are gooseberries that I was talking about. I've got a lot of experiments going on with a lot of different species. What I try to do is I try to collect everything from known cultivars that are good, that I can find them survive up here. And I try to find natives and I try to do crosses on them. And then I propagate out the plants. And when I plant them on my property, I plant them in islands, meaning I'll find an area, I'll prepare it, and I'll plant maybe 10 together where I can collect the seeds off. That way they're all cross-pollinating. And then the next season, I'll take those new seedlings and I'll move them to a new island. As I collect plants that are actually superior, those plants will go into what I call a victory garden where they're protected and I can do controlled crosses. So
Do one more slide.
I think we're just about at the end. You want to go?
Mine's not that long, so after people can keep going.
Is that all right, Kasha? Okay, well, if you want to go back. So go back to this one. So this is a gooseberry that I grown from seed. It's unique because it has red leaves. I don't believe it to be any type of nutrient deficiency because all the others were in the same soil. They had nice leaves, and this was actually the most vigorous. So again, plants like this are really special to me. I enjoy finding them. Go down. These are some cloudberries. This is another crop that I'd really like to try to develop. I think that there could be a huge market for Fairbanks. There's some problems with them, but they're delicious. You want to go to the next one? These are raspberries. You know, again, I'm always collecting raspberries from plants I eat. I'm collecting them from neighbors. I'm collecting them from people I know. We go to the next one. I'm buying them from markets. Same with strawberries. I'm trying to collect as many species as I can. I'm putting them together and I'm just letting them cross-pollinate. The idea is I'm trying to get as many genetics together as possible and find ones that are adapted to our area. It's easy to call them off if they're not good or have undesirable traits. It's really hard to find ones that will survive here, especially when you start getting into more exotic plants. This last year, I started about 40 different species of Malus and Prunus. So I'm really excited to see what's going to live through this winter. But if you want to go one more frame. So, you know, this is my strawberry patch in town. When I first started it, I'd have major dieback. Most of the strawberries wouldn't make it through winter, but through doing this process, almost the whole patch stays now. Even under these spruce trees, I used to never be able to get strawberries that would grow in that acidic soil. But just by doing the techniques that I'm talking about, like spitting out seeds, if the plant tastes good on the ground or spreading the rotten ones, I'm starting to find plants that'll actually live and thrive there. They're also crossing with the domestic strawberries, which is really great to me because the domestic strawberries are small. You only get a few per plant. Or the hybrids, they're small also, but I might have a bundle of 10 to 12 strawberries on one plant. And they live completely on their own. I don't water them, I don't feed them, I don't take care of them except to rip out weeds that are around them. And they're thriving. On my property, I'll just take strawberries, and I'll just plug them in different areas to see what survives. And if the plants survive and strive, then I'll start making their beds nicer. But one strawberry planted 3 years ago will have runners in a 3-foot radius now. I think we skipped a bunch of those pictures, but if you want to go down again. So this is just a quick example of just plugging one. That's a really low cost investment for me to do that. It's easy to take runners off plants and to put them into pots and move them. And so a strawberry like that doesn't look like anything. Look at that, that's snow on the ground and the strawberry is already thriving. The ground's not even thawed yet. You go to the next slide. And you can see this plant has had no water, no fertilizer, no help on my part. Look how big those leaves are. That's my hand. They're putting on berries. You can see some of this is growing up around it and it's gonna need mowed back. When I mow that back, I'll just use it as fertilizer for the plant. Also rhubarb, it's another great one. We should be using rhubarb in Alaska a lot more. It's so easy, it's low maintenance. It's delicious too. If you just take the stalks and boil them, it makes a wonderful juice. You can sweeten it if you want. You don't have to. You can use it as a thickener when you're trying to make jams and jellies. Just use mostly rhubarb and just enough berries to get the flavor you want. We're gonna go to the next frame. So also, this is rhubarb that I haven't taken care of. I haven't done anything to that besides stick the plant in the ground and lay some sticks around it to identify it so I don't mow it over on accident. And even if I mow it over, it's not a big deal. It's rhubarb, it'll come back. So again, I'm always looking for seeds and germplasm everywhere I go. I'm always keeping a careful eye open. This is the Tamarack Inn. You might notice that sign. I think it's been out of business for probably 30 years. There's these tall spruce trees and look at all these stalks. There's just tons and tons of rhubarb that grow there on their own. You want to go to the next frame? So this is my last point is the best thing that the cheapest, best thing that we could do to improve farming up here and make it easier on everybody is seed collection. When you find plants that are superior, with superior fruiting, or maybe it's a tomato that puts on a ripe fruit early, you should collect the seeds from it. The tomato itself isn't worth a whole lot, but the amount of seeds in there can create all kinds of new plants that are adapted to our community. We're still a pioneer town, and a lot of these are still pioneer plants. And we really should do everything we can to protect the best of them and share them. I'm using my property as a repository for genetics, but I think that somebody or some group of people should start collecting and acting as a repository. If everybody collected the plants that were the best, and we put them together, we grew them, and we let them cross-pollinate, we don't know what's gonna come from it, but I can guarantee you that we're gonna create plants that are adapted to our area. And because they're adapted to our area, they're gonna have a unique flavor, they're gonna have a unique look. And to me, that's building real culture in Alaska. It's something that we lack. I don't like importing bananas and everything else up here. I'd like us to have our own fruits. And so that's kind of what I want to leave everybody on is next time you harvest next year and you have a plant that's superior, just think, you know, I should save these seeds. Because it's really what's going to push the process forward.
Doesn't Esther have some kind of a?
Esther does have a seed exchange. Yep.
Do they say?
I'm not sure exactly. Any other questions or anything?
Your contact info?
My contact info?
Yeah. How do we find you?
How do you find me? Go to the Asian food market, become a regular customer.
Oh.
We have,